Hi, my name is Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Financial Channel. I'm going to also post this particular video on our regular Common Sense Christian site and also the Common Sense Christian Patriot site, because I think this particular topic is one that affects just about every area of our lives. And so I really want to get this particular message out, because I don't believe that many people are really thinking about it, at least not in these terms. Well, what is this particular message? And it's going to be on homelessness, but maybe not in the way that you're thinking. You may be thinking the way that I typically do when I think of the homeless. I think of somebody who is either mentally ill and just cannot function in society. They've just kind of fallen through the cracks. Or somebody who's a heavy drug or alcohol user who is so addicted to their substance that every available penny goes to that substance, and they're no longer even employable, much less even if they had been, could they actually stay in a nice place or in any place at all, because they're spending so much of their money on their addiction. But what really shocked me was the number of people who are homeless who have a job. There's a government agency called the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. And according to their statistics, between 40 and 60% of the homeless actually have a job. Think about that for a moment. About half of the people who cannot afford a house have a job. And I'm sure that part of these people are just those that maybe have a part-time job enough to get them whatever substance that they may need or whatever else that they're doing with their money. But I have an idea also from looking into this that a number of these people are good, hard-working people, but they just can't afford a place to live on the salary that they make. This particular figure was so shocking to me that I kept on doing a little bit of research to try and make sure that it was accurate. Came across the University of Chicago study from, I believe it was 2021, and their findings were that 53% of the homeless had a job. And so this problem really is a problem that goes beyond a simple factor of those who are mentally ill or those who are slaves to some sort of an addiction that they just don't have the ability to get out of. And so let me first talk about this particular issue from a financial standpoint. One of the reasons for the Common Sense Christian Financial Channel is to try and help people, especially those who are just starting out, to get their finances under control early. Matter of fact, to get them under control before they get out of control too far. We are a credit binge society. It seems like everything we do has to be done with borrowed money. Of course, it would be nearly impossible to buy a house under the current circumstances with cash, but a lot of people insist on driving a new car, and they give themselves all sorts of reasons for doing that. But by doing that, by insisting on driving a new car, they usually commit about $1,000 of their monthly salary to everything from their monthly payment to the extra insurance that they're going to have to pay on the car. And then, of course, the regular gasoline expenses and other types of transportation expenses. But the point is that a lot of people just, as a matter of habit, only will buy a new car or a really nice used car that has a payment that's nearly as much as a new car. And then you start looking at the way people use their credit and their credit cards. They don't think twice about paying for something on a credit card that they could not afford with the money that they have in their bank account, or they couldn't afford with the cash that they have in their pocket. And so everything goes on the credit card. And so often these credit cards get revolving credit and huge interest rates. The average interest rate in 2025 is about 24% a year or 2% a month. That means if you have a $5,000 balance, you're paying $100 a month just on interest. And so I really wanted to try and help people to start being more strategic in their finances. And one of the reasons for that is because we're all going to get older and we're all going to hopefully retire someday, or at least be able to retire if we want to. I stepped down from my job a few years ago. It was a good paying job, but there were other things that I wanted to do. I still work on a daily basis and usually pretty hard, but it's a little more of a relaxed schedule than I had before. And I'm able to do these YouTube channels and write daily articles and things like that, something that I've always wanted to do. And my wife writes Bible curriculum, and so she's able to have the time to be able to do that. And so there are reasons for wanting to be able to retire from your full-time job that go beyond just wanting to take it easy. But you cannot do that if you have been abusive with your finances or careless with your finances. The fact is that most people make an income that is good enough to where they could pay the bills that they needed to pay and still have at least 10% left over for savings and some sort of an investment that they might like to have that will help them to be able to save for the future, and hopefully in some kind of a financial instrument that will actually increase in value, so it'll be worth a lot more than when they put those funds aside for the savings. And so that was a big focus on this financial channel, but it startles me now to think that there are people who are now in their 70s and older who have to work just to be able to have a place to live. Their Social Security would not cover their living expenses otherwise. A large number of these homeless people are in fact elderly. I was watching a video just today of a 72-year-old woman in Massachusetts, and she's homeless. They didn't appear particularly careless with their finances, but her husband died a number of years ago, and she was on her own and just struggling to make ends meet, as you might imagine, and so now she does have a car at least, but she's living out of her car, and she lives in Massachusetts. I guess that's where her family is from, and the rents are very high there. Certainly, she couldn't afford the rent on the type of income she has coming in per month. And so here at 72 years old, a time when you ought to be able to relax a little bit and take your foot off the throttle, she is homeless, living out of her car. And she was talking about a number of her acquaintances that are in the exact same situation that she is. She talked about one lady that she knew that was living in the wooded part of a local cemetery because she had no other place to go. And I know that you're gonna immediately say, well, there are shelters and things like that, but the shelters are pretty well full in a lot of the areas, and those that aren't full, quite frankly, are not that safe, and especially for an older single woman. And so here is an area of society that's just kind of fallen through the cracks. And for we men, for those of us who are married, this ought to give us extra incentive to start being more responsible with our finances. And so, again, this particular issue is one that certainly is a financial issue, but it's also a moral issue. Just from a Christian standpoint, just from a humanity standpoint, this shouldn't be. When I was born in 1960, there were certainly people who were on low incomes, but they had housing available. Even on a minimum wage job, you could afford to live somewhere with 4 walls and a ceiling and heat. And that's not the case so much anymore. It should it should shame us as a Christian society that we've gotten to that point. And as Christians, especially when we look at our own families, we need to be, I believe, thinking about this very type of a possibility in our lives so that we can start making some provision so that it doesn't happen. And especially, again, for those of us who are married and have wives, we don't want our wife, after we pass, if we go first, to be homeless because we didn't make enough provisions for them while we were living. See, a lot of times when the man dies, the woman loses about half of her Social Security income. And what you could actually live on before, she can no longer live on that. And it's the same for men, by the way. When their wife dies, half of their Social Security very often will go away. And so what do you do then? So this is a moral issue for Christians. This is something that we need to have enough Christian foresight, enough compassion for our loved ones, and enough responsibility as a steward of God's possessions to make sure that we're using them well right now, so that later on we still have enough resources to be able to manage to get by. I'm not talking about hoarding, and I'm not talking about being greedy and pinching every penny. I'm just talking about using some prudence because it is the Christian thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. And for those of us who have loved ones who will be left behind when we go, we need to be thinking about them and about their situation. You might be saying, well, if you're a Christian, you just need to have faith in God. I agree, we do need to have faith in God. But faith has never been the same as presumption, and a lot of Christians get those two things mixed up. They think they can live in an irresponsible way and that God will just take care of them because He loves them so much. But don't be surprised if you find out later on that what you were thinking was faith was little more than presumption, and maybe even a welfare mentality where you just thought that God would have to take care of you no matter how you lived, no matter how imprudent you were with your resources. And again, I want to say this is a moral issue, a Christian issue. It's also an issue for patriots. And why do I say that? Well, America was founded on some pretty important principles. If you haven't lately, I would recommend you go back and read some of the documents from our founding fathers, from those righteous men and women who were trying to leave a nation behind that would truly be a nation that was a righteous nation, a nation that recognized that God was their sovereign and that He was to be obeyed and that Jesus was His Son and that He was to be served and that we were to live our lives for them. That was what this nation was founded on. I always loved what Alexis de Tocqueville said. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who came over, I can't remember the exact year, the 1830s or 1840s, somewhere along those lines. He wanted to find out why America was doing so well. And at first he thought it might be the natural resources, all the great things that America had, from the vast woodlands to the fertile plains to the mining, and then to the things that we did with it, to the industry that we built around that. And so he thought maybe that was it. He searched all over for the reason for America's greatness, and he finally concluded that it was because America was good. America recognized that God was their sovereign. And he said, it wasn't until I went into the churches in America and I heard their pulpits flame with righteousness that I understood. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. Can we say, from a patriotic standpoint, that a great nation would allow the type of problem that we have where decent people, hardworking people, cannot even afford to find a decent place to live in America. There are some, I realize, who are not taking advantage of resources that they could be. I realize that there are some who are financially ignorant and who could have done a better job trying to figure out how to make ends meet with what they have. But I want to say again, it didn't used to be this way. Just in 1960, when I was born, you didn't have this homeless problem. Most of the people who were homeless were homeless because they were alcoholics, and they spent all their money on alcohol. They didn't have places to live. They usually lived in different types of shelters or something like that. But other than that, most people had a place to live. And government agencies were there to try and help people who were falling through the cracks. Not people who would abuse the system, but people who were doing their best and who needed a hand up. And certainly the churches were the same way. I say this is a patriotic issue because we have gotten to the point now where our government has become a giant leech. I've forgotten the exact day that Tax Independence Day in America is, but it's somewhere about the halfway point in the year. Americans pay about half of their income between Social Security and income taxes, real estate taxes, sales taxes, state taxes, all the rest of the taxes, about half. Even God never asked for more than 10%. The wicked nation of Egypt, when they were taking over everything, even stopped at 20% of the people's income. America takes about 50%, sometimes more. This is evil. This is wicked. Part of it is not intentionally wicked. It's just the way things are, and we just keep getting more and more out of hand. And sometimes our government officials have the best things at heart, but they just don't know how to really do it. They're wasteful, they're inefficient, they're incompetent. Something needs to change, and patriots need to realize that this system cannot continue to go on as it's been going on. It's declining to the point where more and more hardworking people literally cannot afford a place to stay. And so they're living out of their cars, or they're living in a tent, or they're doubling up or tripling up or quadrupling up in a home that was designed for one family. That's not a great nation anymore. This is a nation in decline. And patriots ought to be taking note, and we ought to be doing something that goes beyond just demanding of our leaders that they do something, but intentionally selecting leaders who we are confident will try and do something. So it's a patriotic issue. It's a financial issue. It's a moral issue. It's a patriotic issue. And again, more than anything else, it's a human issue. It's a Christian issue. We need to be thinking about it. We need to be on guard with our own families to try and make sure that we don't have people that fall through the cracks that we could have somehow helped. We need to, as churches, to be making sure that we're doing what we can to help people who are in genuine need, not just people looking for welfare and another handout so they can use the rest of their funds on sinful lifestyles. But churches can figure out who might really need help and who might not. And then, of course, we need to try and get our government back under control to where it actually acts as a body of servants who have the best interest of the people in mind, rather than self-enrichment. You look at our congressmen, you look at our senators, you look at just about every aspect of our government, and you're looking at rich people. If they weren't rich when they got in, they're rich when they get out. That should not be. That should be enough of a problem to us that we get rid of people like that immediately. We can have better, but we're going to have to demand better. And maybe this is the most important part of the message today. Before we can demand better of others, we have to demand better of ourselves. That means if we've been wrong, we need to repent. If we've been permissive of things that are just sinful, we need to repent of that sin. We need to come back to God on His terms, and then we can start praying to God for His assistance. People have stopped praying to God for help other than just as a last act of desperation. We need to be praying to God for wisdom to know what to do and for His help to help us get through these difficult times. But it's going to start with us repenting first. Then we can ask Him for help. Then we can set about the task of cleaning up what's happened to our once great nation. Almost half, and sometimes more than half, of the people who are homeless in America today are working Americans. They just can't afford a place to stay because of what we have come to. We need to do something about that. It begins with your relationship with God, and then that continues with your responsibility financially and as a citizen of the United States. We can make things better, but we're going to have to start, and we better start soon. Well, that's the message for today. I realize it's not all that cheerful, but I do believe it's important. Let me ask you this, a special favor. If you haven't already, please subscribe to these channels. Please like the video if it's something that you do like. Please share it with others if you can. And make comments if you have a comment that you'd like to pass along, because that helps the video get out to a whole lot more people for each comment that's made. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it. But again, I thank you for listening today. I hope it's something that you'll think about. And I pray that together that we can, at some point, be able to take a turn from the reckless direction we've been going as a nation and sometimes as individuals, and we can come back to God and start to right the things that are clearly wrong today. Thanks for listening. I hope we'll see you next time. God bless.